Alrighty, in this last video, we're going to talk about Susan Glaspell's Trifles. So Susan Glaspell was born in 1876 and died in 1948. According to AmericanLiterature.com, she co-founded the first modern American theater company called the Provincetown Players, and she was a Pulitzer Prize-winning playwright, actress, novelist, and journalist. Most of her 9 novels, 14 plays, and over 50 short stories are set in Iowa, where she was raised. Trifles was written in 1916. It is a one-act play based on the murder trial she covered as a young reporter and is considered one of the greatest works in American theater, as well as an important piece of feminist literature. It was also later rewritten as a short story. So it premiered on August 8th, 1916 in Massachusetts. Like I said, it was retold as a short story in 1917. She wrote A Jury of Her Peers, and it goes pretty much into the same detail, but maybe a little bit more in depth because it's a short story instead of a play. And it's an iconic piece of modern American theater and feminist literature. So in the play, it details the murder of a husband by the wife, and she is already in jail at the start of the play, and the men are going to go into the house to try to investigate her motive and try to basically find all the evidence they need to nail her to get the conviction that they want, because of course they think, you know, I mean, yes, murder is wrong, but they're very much in the how could she ever, kill such an upstanding gentleman that we know. Um, and the women are meant to kind of help, get some of the stuff together that she needs, like get some clothes together for jail, get, some things in order in the house. And of course, because the men dismiss what the women do as trifles, hence the title of the play, um, they don't actually see what the real motive and find the real clues. The women find the clues in what's going on, that the husband who was murdered was abusive to Minnie, the murderess, and that most likely what happened is that she snapped in order to protect herself, and that it's basically what today we would acknowledge as a classic case of self-defense in an abuse case, and that he was not an upstanding citizen like the men think he is. And it is through their women's work that they find the real story. And of course, that's why, the title A Jury of Her Peers, our system in America is that you are supposed to be judged by a jury of your peers. But of course, until mid to late 1900s, we had all juries were all white men. So it was not always a true jury of your peers. It was very much biased. And so if it had been a true jury of her peers, of women on there to be able to, argue for her, then the outcome might have been very different. Some themes in this one we have of women and femininity. It's one of the first feminist dramas and features women being ignored and belittled despite having the answers. The women are the ones who solve the crime. They are the ones who have the answers to what happened, and the men ignore them and belittle them. A big thing of justice and judgment and the difference between them, what is truly justice is different in every case. And what people judge as justice is different depending on the point of view. So in this particular case, the men would have seen justice as the woman being hanged for killing her husband. But what the women see is the abuse, in addition to all the injustices that women go through at the hands of their husbands at this time period. The abuse alone would have been something that, you know, is it truly justice that she goes to jail or gets hanged? She would finally be free in her husband's death from the torture that is her life. What kind of life is that to lead? And then to get free of all that, her only way out was to kill her husband and then to be killed herself. Is that truly justice? And, what kind of judgment should we pass on the situation? There's also a theme of isolation. The women talk about the fact that when the murderess got married, she left her family's house to go to her husband's house, and their house was out in the middle of nowhere, with few neighbors that people didn't weren't able to witness the abuse that was going on. They didn't know that their marriage was not a good one for her, that he was a terrible person to be married to. And the isolation allowed him to get away with a lot of the terrible atrocities that he committed. But it also meant that she had no help, no escape from the situation. There's a slight theme of men and masculinity, and, how obviously the fact of the way the men think versus the women. Um, Freedom and confinement, we've talked about this a lot, the fact that she's confined in prison for her crime, but finally free from the abuse. Also, when, she was free, she was confined to the house. She was confined to her marriage and what the murderess had to do, what her abusive husband said. There's also a theme of violence just through the fact of the abuse. This is especially seen through the canary, and the killing of the canary really shows that if he was willing to do that to a bird, what was he willing to do to her? Um, and there's also a theme of visions of America. America is changing at this time period. We're at, when she wrote it, it's during the feminist rights movement. Women get the right to vote 2 years later. It's also during the Jim Crow era, even though this doesn't really have as much to do with race, but it shows about how things are changing for women and that they're trying to make things better. Now, obviously, nothing we get women get the right to vote 2 years later, but that doesn't stop the fight for equality. Um, you know, Women couldn't own credit cards in their own names, without their husband until the late 1980s, early 1990s. Women couldn't have property still. Women weren't, unless you were a working class woman and there are only so many jobs you could do, there wasn't a lot of women in the workforce until World War II. And then when the men came back from war and started filling the positions again, a lot of women were forced to forget their independent lives of when we needed them and go back to being the typical American housewife. So, and even to today, we're still fighting for wage equality and different things for women, and there's still issues, but it shows that at this time period, America is changing, and especially towards the feminist, the dismissing women and their ideas. Yes, it still happens today, but not to the same extent that this play shows. Women are definitely investigators now and solve crimes and notice things that men don't. And it's true that in many disciplines, as we've added women to these disciplines over the last 100 years, everything is changing. We're getting new perspectives on things, which makes the disciplines better because it makes a more rounded knowledge base for those disciplines. So that's also a way to see it as we've seen things. This play shows not just how women and men look at things differently, but how that can change the situation, right? And the last thing are symbolism, imagery, and allegory. The dead bird is really Minnie Foster, our murderess. She, if she had stayed and allowed him to continue the abuse without killing him to protect herself, she would have ended up dead like that bird. And that's what this symbol is suggesting. And it's really the dead bird that really, really, really gets the people to realize, you know, in death, the bird is free. In the cage, it wasn't free. Um, the broken cage suggests, and to the women, again, that it was a sucky marriage. It was not the marriage that everyone portrayed it to be on the outside from what little they knew. And the fact that the killing of Minnie Foster's husband was an escape for Minnie, so she didn't end up like the dead bird. The shattered preserves shows all the hard work women do that the men ignore. They show women talk about, oh wow, that must have been so much work. And it really is preserving fruits and making jams and different things. It is a lot of hard work. Um, until someone has gone through it themselves, they don't realize how difficult it is. And to do all that work and have it wasted, and the men just dismiss it as something, minor, and not realize, how much work went through to make something that the husbands and families would enjoy. It is representative of all the hard work that women do that men ignore. Um, and again, this is something that could be referenced today, that not just men, but in general, you know, we look at people with jobs as having hard work, and we don't realize that being a wife or a husband sometimes, depending on the roles observed in the marriage, being a parent, all of that is hard work that usually gets added on top of at regular jobs. And a lot of it gets ignored by other people, whether gender-based ignoring or um, just outside people ignoring, like looking down on housewives and mothers and not realizing they have a tough job too, even if they're not out in the workforce. So it's very much symbolic, though, in this play of more the gender bias, that there's a lot of hard work women do. At this time period, men are like, well, I get up every day and I go out to work and I do all this stuff. And they don't realize all the hard work that women do in the household, to running the household, to making sure there's food for in the house, to making sure there's food on the table when he gets home, to making sure the children are cleaned and well fed and get to school, and that the house is clean. And this is all very, very difficult stuff that we've talked about with like the yellow wallpaper, the fact that not Gilman at least believed that not everyone is suited to automatically do housework and be a mother, a caretaker, just because they can be a mother, just because they can be a wife. Not everyone's suited, and it's a lot of work to get it right. So this is really one of the first stories that shows that feminist approach in drama. Obviously, we have short stories and novels that show the feminist movement, but this is one of the first dramas that does that. And the fact that it's only a one act play, you know, it has a lot of the same hallmark as Greek theater, the fact of unity of time, place, and action. It takes place over one afternoon. It takes place in one area. It has one plot, no subplot. It is both talking to the traditions of theater and drama, as well as moving into the new age. It depicts a new um, topic, and something that's topical for the time because it was based on a true story, and it still is able to play on the hallmarks of theater while taking some of the new ideas of theater, the fact that women were allowed to play as actresses as well. So this is Trifles. Again, be thinking about, some of the themes, some of the messages, why it's so important to have this kind of literature at this time period, especially, but in general. what could it still tell us about today? All right, and make sure to use the drama study guide as a lot of the things you need to study that will help you on the drama exam. All right, have a great day, everyone.